So glad to have you here on our show today, Reza. And just a quick question, because we've known each other for a number of years now.
We have.
I'm not going to introduce you because you've switched so many jobs in the last few years that it's impossible to introduce you. So why don't you tell me what you do?
So what do I do now? So I'm a professor in political science at the University of Alberta, and I specialize in Chinese politics. But as you've known, I've had many different careers and many different experiences in the past, and it's involved looking at returns to education. I was a sociologist at one point. I was in management school at another point. So it's law school as well, myriads of experiences. But ultimately, it's looking at inequality. It's looking at different ways of understanding inequality from different perspectives. Yeah.
And you have a book coming out of that, right?
Yeah, I have a few books on that. I'm writing a book on this right now, looking at the minority in the corporation.
Okay.
And how the minority experiences the large corporation in particular, from the job search, the hiring process, to the promotion, to even retirement. I talk about getting fired as well in the book. So it's an interesting...
And this is kind of like building on your... so your previous book is Ethnic Penalty.
It is.
We're looking at ethnic inequality in Canada, and this is kind of building on that work.
Yeah, so it's not only in Canada, it's global in scope. Well, the book looks at Canada, but it's another book that looks at it in the context of China. It's another book that looks... There's another research that I've done that looks in the context of Australia, and the US, and the UK. But what's very commonplace among all of them is this idea that your education is not enough to get a job. You need more than that. And I don't think that's something we talk to our kids about, that it's about networking. 2/3 of all jobs are found through networks. It's about being able to fit within a working culture. It's about trust. It's a myriad of things that go beyond formal human capital.
Right. So sounds like a lot of it's, you could sum it up as soft skills.
It's soft skills, effectively. It really is. And, and I can understand on the one hand, if you work so hard to get a good education, to get good grades and so forth, you expect you're going to get a good wage, you're going to get a good salary. But again, that's not how salaries are usually determined. It's usually determined in a very different process than your hard skills alone.
Wow, and you could find this in your research.
And the research shows it, and not only my research, there's a plethora of research out there that reinforces things such as confidence, and things such as trust, and things such as fit, and these characteristics that are, go beyond the traditional understanding of how to get a job, and a high wage one. It all plays a role. So.
We can get back to this conversation later.
Sure.
So I know you're not just ethnic inequality. There's a whole bunch of other stuff.
Of course.
How about the children?
Yes.
How about AI.
Right.
I mean, that's the stuff that you dabbled in as well, right?
Yeah, so I've looked at energy, the future of energy in the world globally. How can we get more academic research to support, more basic research, in fact, to support advances in energy, and how we can have clean energy effectively. I've looked at machine learning, how we can improve machine learning to improve society at large, the ethics of that. And also looking at the well-being of the world's children, how to improve children's lives at the everyday, effectively. It's amazing because it's really the young ages, from 0 to 14 are so formable. If you screw that up, you really set the path, a very negative path for their life course. Or it's been a different way. If you make it in a positive way, it improves and increases your chances dramatically if you're able to actually achieve a healthy kind of childhood.
Right. Anything else other than those fields?
So that's what I'm working on right now. I'm looking at NGOs as well.
NGOs in China. That's
NGOs in China. That's how we met. Yeah. Looking at we have a paper on this, religious NGOs, and just looking at the maturation of NGOs and social organizations in China. There's a few large surveys looking at China, looking at volunteerism, looking at why do people give philanthropy, why do people donate and conduct philanthropy, looking at citizens' expectations of the state in China. There's a myriad of activities in China that I'm still working on as well.
And you also look at migration?
Migration, so we're looking at irregular migrants. I've looked at that in an Australian context. So looking at people coming into Australia via boat, etc. We're looking at what happens when a migrant comes to Canada, or do they dehumanize themselves? So looking at their process of integrating and so forth. So that's a project that's continuing as well.
So it's obvious you're a man of many interests.
Many interests. I get bored easily. So
you get bored easily, obviously, right?
It all ties in some form. But if you can do all these different things, it makes things interesting.
So how do you juggle all this stuff? I mean, that's a lot of different hats you're wearing. And academics, right? The typical image of an academic is you specialize in something. You should basically drill at that for like the rest of your life. So in your case,
there's two ways to go about this. The first way is, it's a very difficult path to do so many different things as an academic because that's not the traditional path. If you think about the average academic, for them to get a PhD, they have to become very specialized in a particular discipline, and they generally go into that discipline and become the expert in that particular subfield.
Right, the guy.
The guy, exactly. I was given those pressures, so I was lucky. I did my PhD in the UK, where it was social and political science, which was sociology, political science, psychology, all wrapped into one.
And this was at Cambridge?
This was at Cambridge. That program has shifted now. They've gone the more traditional route where it's you specifically specialize in one instead of a combination of all. Right. And I remember my supervisor saying, you need to choose. You need to choose either sociology or management or political science. And I said, I don't want to choose. And I think for me that was, there's some pitfalls in doing that because it takes longer for you to develop a profile in a specific area to show that you are worthwhile as an academic. So that's why I ended up publishing so much because it was in 3 different fields. And so I was tenured in those 3 different fields.
So political science,
management, and sociology.
Right. Okay, so tell me about, let's rewind it a bit.
Sure.
Who did you hang out with in high school or like in your childhood?
Sure. So I went for a school for advanced kids. I think that's what the polite way to say it these days is.
So you were in a gifted school?
Yeah, it was in a gifted program since grade 3. Prior to that, I was in an advanced behavioral school. I was a troubled child.
A troubled child?
A very troubled child.
Because you were too advanced?
Or maybe because I was too mischievous. I got kicked out of 6 different schools.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't hear this story.
No.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. Well, my parents are to their great shame, and I guess now they kind of understand now, because there's no manual how to raise an advanced kid, and so I would misbehave in class. I would during playtime I would like pick fights and
just walk up to a kid and start like picking.
Well, they would take my toys, and it's like, hey, you didn't ask, and it's like
you didn't ask.
Exactly. It's very mischievous. I just got bored very easily. I just didn't see the point of doing half these things. Because I went from point A to point Z. The process is not something I appreciate until adulthood. But as a kid, you just if you saw how you got to point Z without this process that you learn, it can be frustrating. You got to wait until everyone catches up with you.
Why? It's like kind of like doing math and you show your steps. It's like, like really?
It's like that's the answer.
Right.
And I remember it's interesting you say math. We had Kumon math in one of our years, and it's just repetition and repetition. It's just like, someone, please, this is too much. I just couldn't. It's just I got the point the first time or the second time. Don't need this repetition. So that's why I would have acted out and got kicked out.
Right. So your parents, I remember you telling me that you guys are immigrants. From
Trinidad.
Right? And your parents, you guys came to Canada. You went to 6 different schools until finally.
Even more. I mean, the story is even more complex than that.
All right.
So I went to, I moved around a lot as a child. And went to numerous schools before then. And when we came to Canada, I also went to numerous different schools, just trying to find the perfect fit. And if that fit never actually came, to be very frank.
Even the advanced school?
Even the advanced school. It was a program where you would, in the beginning of the week, you would say to your teacher what you're doing. You would write a contract for the week, and you say what your activities are going to do, and you would do it. I would finish it the first 2 days. And the last 3 days, I would just goof around. And so
it's very much self-driven.
It's self-driven.
So much autonomy.
Yeah. And I think they realized I needed autonomy at some point, which is not surprising when I became a professor, because you have pretty much full autonomy. There's no real boss. You make your own hours. You're driven. You have to self-drive yourself and motivate yourself.
So in elementary school, were you years before your peers?
Yeah, so I didn't go to kindergarten. I skipped right to what in the Caribbean they call Standard 1, which is the equivalent of grade 1, I guess. But
so you were like 5 and you were in
I
grade
was
1.
3.5, 4 years.
3.5 and you were in grade 1.
Yeah. And
so your peers would be 6?
5 and a half, 6. Yeah.
5.5, 6, right?
Yeah. It was, again, I mean, when we talk about it, it seems kind of like, oh, that's kind of weird. But when you're a kid, and even today, age is not something I think about. Right. If you ask me what my age is, I actually have to calculate what my age is. Because I guess if you don't know anything different, you just think you're normal until you look back and you're like, oh, this is abnormal.
Right.
But there's a catch-22. If you're complacent, that you're so, you've done things so quickly, you feel like, why continue doing? You can just wait until everyone catches up.
Right.
But that's not how I was socialized to think.
Right.
It's just socialized to do what you enjoy and be the best at it.
Right. So you were socialized to be driven, and even like if you're like years ahead of other kids.
It's not something that was conscious of. Right. It was not even in the world, my worldview of all
just keep doing you kind of thing.
Just do what I have to do. Right. And to be very frank, for my parents, they just wanted to make sure I wasn't in more trouble. So it's pretty much that, right? It's just hopefully he gets through schooling and and he actually finishes schooling. That's what they're concerned about. Right. They're also concerned with the social aspects, right?
So tell me about life in this advanced school then, like. Right. Were you there throughout high school, like for like elementary and high school?
No. So I mean, there were different advanced programs, different schools that had advanced programs. Jumped numerous schools. So from elementary schools, I started in grade 3, grade 4. Went French immersion. Learned a few languages on the way. They put us into a program where the same classmates you would have throughout. So we never actually mixed with others at some point.
It's kind of like a cohort system.
Yeah, in many respects. By grade 9, I was in grade 13. So in Ontario, they had a grade 13 OAC year. Yeah. So in grade 9, I was doing most of my courses, save for PE, was OAC. Right. So I started OAC in grade 9, and grade 10, I finished all the OAC courses in my school. So
you went straight to university.
Well, at that juncture, the counselors were saying, "Well, you're 12 and a half. You can't go straight to university at 12 and a half."
Why not?
Well, they're child protection laws.
Okay.
So, in fact, I think I might be mistaken in the particular age, but I think for most North American jurisdictions, you need to get a background check if you're working with minors. And so university professors do not get background checks.
Right.
So that's why I ended up going to Oxford because they didn't do the background checks back then.
Oh, okay.
So that's the reason why I ended up going there at 14. But I could have graduated at 13, but socially they didn't think I was ready. So this is called my grade 10 year, going on grade 11 year. I ended up doing grade 12 and grade 11 courses. I went backwards.
So like all the OAC's done. Yeah, just go work back now.
Yeah, and it got to the point where I never showed up to class. My teachers were like, "Why are your grades worse off in grade 12 and grade 11 than your OAC year beforehand?" Right. Just like at that juncture, I probably was going to fail. Right. I was going to fail out of schooling. Right. And so they said, "Okay, you should probably go to university.
Just move on."
Yeah, just move on. Yeah.
Who did you hang out with in high school then?
I had I'm non-threatening.
Right.
So I hanged out with the jocks, hanged out with the athletes, or I guess the athletes, hang out with goths, hang out with people musically inclined, hanged out with the actors, I hanged out with the dweebs, you name it, pretty much all the social groupings, because again, it was non-threatening.
Right, you're kind of like a social chameleon.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's helpful when you grew up just going in so many different schools. It's very easy to make friends.
Right. It's like, it's for you, it's just
like... Yeah, it's just like whatever. It's just you connect with people in different ways. And if you have so many different interests, from music to sports to reading or whatever it might be, you were able to find these different groupings in schools. So...
And at these schools, you wouldn't stand out as being exceptionally young because everyone's kind of advanced.
Well, advanced, but not young. So most people I was the youngest. I was always the youngest.
You were always the youngest.
But luckily, I had my growth spur at a younger age. So physically, I kind of looked the way I am. But people would have known. I remember I had in my OEC year, people would like, here's a young one, let's take care of him. It's more like that rather than, oh, he's a freak kind of.
Right.
I was it could have been worse socially. Right. So I was very lucky that people were supportive. And even in university, people were super supportive.
So after that, after high school, you went to Oxford?
I went to Oxford.
And then what did you do in Oxford?
So I was enrolled in philosophy, and so I did that for a year. And
is that a 3-year program?
It's a 3-year program. I did for a year, but I transferred to Georgetown.
Okay.
Because at that point, they were able to, the age was not an issue at that juncture.
Right.
So I went to Georgetown and then came to Queens, and so I transferred again. And you can see a pattern here in my own university career, right?
Right. So you didn't finish Georgetown. It was like only a year.
Yeah, I only did a year and a bit. Oxford a year and Queens a year.
And you were alone the whole time? Did your parents come with
you? No, I was always alone.
You were always alone?
Yeah.
So wait, how did you survive as a 14-year-old alone in Oxford?
It's not that, it sounds, the way you put it, it's like, oh, how did he do that? But it's like going to boarding school. It's like...
but there's no boarding program. That's the thing. It's kind of like...
But it is boarding, except you have more, but you have, you live in dorms, or you live in colleges. It's a life that, it's just... Again, you don't know any different. You do not think you're 14. You just think you're 18, 19-year-old, just doing the normal thing.
You can't go to the bars, though.
Well, it's interesting that you say. For the most part, I was able to go to the pubs and stuff, but I never really drank that much. I just remember one incident where it was a birthday party at the pub. It was the pub in Oxford. It was interesting.
The college one or public one?
Public one. It was a public one. It was a King's Arms. I'm not sure.
King's Arms. King's Arms. Yeah, of course.
And it was a 9 p.m. and beyond, and the guy goes to me, you're kind of young. I don't know if you should be here. And it's like, I'm not drinking. He's like, yeah, even still, it's not good perception. So that's the only times ever occurred. Mind you, this is 2.5 decades ago, so it's a very different reality.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, I've never had any issues thereafter. So.
But even at Oxford, there would be other whiz kids there, right? Or were you like?
I never encountered. It's not like there's a club of us where we go meet each other, and it's like, hey, what's going on?
Right.
I was an unusual one because most people who are advanced at that age are usually in the sciences. Because you usually advance quicker in the sciences than you do in the social sciences.
Right, because there's objective truth.
Yeah. And so people can peak quickly in the sciences. Social sciences was probably the only one, just because.
So Oxford, Georgetown, Queens, and where did you finish?
I ended up had a degree from Queens.
Okay, so you finished.
Queens. Then had a master's there again.
Okay.
And then I went to Yale. I went to
Yale for
law.
Yale
law. Did UNSW in Australia. Did a master's there. Went to SOAS in the UK. Another master's there. Cambridge, another master's, and a PhD in the end. So,
in Cambridge as well.
In Cambridge as well.
So you have 4 masters.
And look, it really. Yeah. It's not something I think about. It's not it's it's something you think in the everyday. It's not. It's not the destination. It's just a process.
It's just a process. But why did you do something in masters? Like, you're just interested in new topics?
It's not that. There's 2 pressures, right? The first pressure is who's going to hire a 16-year-old fresh out of undergrad. So that had its issues. My first job was with USAID. I was 18, and that had its issues as well. USAID is the U.S. Agency for International Development, based out of D.C. And even then, people were like, "Who's that kid, and why is he working here?" And so it was. As I said, and I think that kind of influences the work that you do. It's like. It shows that it's not only human capital alone, because I had a lot of human capital. It's the social aspects, right? And that plays a role in the job.
So there was just a social mismatch.
It's social mismatch.
Different places until you really became a certain age. And it's become socially acceptable. Oh, this guy is in his 20s.
Then it becomes
normal.
Right? Yeah, it becomes more normalized. People can trust you more. They would trust you, but at a certain level, they can connect with you.
Tell me that story. You told me this story before about. You went to this place, and then this person thought you were an intern, and it turns out you were kind of their superior, right?
Right. This was actually USAID.
Okay.
So I was hired, and I was in charge of the Hungary desk. which at the time Hungary was transitioning from a post-communist to a more market economy. So I was running the program there.
This was the 90s then.
This was the late 90s, yeah. And it was interesting because, on paper, I definitely look older and so forth. But the first day I go in, people are like, "Are you here for the internship?" It's like, no, I'm actually going to be your boss. You're your boss. It's nice to meet you. And it's funny because that happens often. It happened often anyways in my 20s.
Not anymore though, right?
Not as much. It gets manifested in a different way now. Now they think I'm a PhD student perhaps sometimes. I still get that.
That time, you were my examiner.
Yeah.
Right? And then, but when you were there early, someone else thought you were a student.
Yeah.
Even though there's no way you're not a TAM.
No, and it was something I would never forget. It's just you walk into the room and the person who you're co-examining with says, "Are you the student?" And you're just like, "No, I'm your co-examiner." Right. But that still happens. I was just giving a talk a few weeks ago in Warsaw, and they thought I was a PhD student and I was not the speaker. So it still happens. On the one hand, you take it with grace that you still look young enough. On the other hand, you're like, well, at some point I hope I can get physical respectability, shall I say.
Yeah.
But it's on paper, as I said, I look like a 50 and 60-year-old.
But there's you're a fully tenured professor when you were 32?
In my 30s, early 30s.
In your early 30s, you became a fully tenured professor, and that's in the social sciences. That's
usually happens in the 50s and the early 50s.
Yeah. Like you said, in the hard sciences, sure.
Right.
But in the social sciences,
it's very rare. It's extremely rare.
Yeah.
And in certain countries, it's even rarer. It gets even older. So when they see you're a full professor, they look at you and it's like, how's that possible?
Right.
And again, they see it on paper, and they see on paper, it's just there's a mismatch.
Right. And just to kind of segue into the ethnic bit, right?
Right.
The fact that you're brown.
Yeah.
It also throws the public
things around,
right?
Yeah.
It's because Asians or brown people tend to.
Right.
The stereotype is they look younger.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting because being a prof at Oxford for a few years, it was people never took me. If I go give talks and so forth, I always thought, well, maybe they were expecting someone with a nice British accent, very posh British accent, or someone who's super intellectual in the way they profess themselves and so forth. But then they have me, and I kind of not that sort of stereotypical, academic from the UK, from an elite institution. Canadian accent. I kind of dress down. I'm kind of relaxed, and so. I think that play a role as well. So there's signaling, and I think that's if we want to intellectualize this, it's about the signaling, right?
Signal theory.
And
so explain to us what signal theory is. In
this context, what I mean is, the way you present yourself can signal your, numerous kinds of characteristics about you, and we tend to have stereotypes about what those characteristics are. So, for instance, we say professor, we think someone wearing a tweed jacket, or especially from an Oxford institution, with a posh British accent, and speaking in the stars. And when someone is talking to you in the most plainest language and very down to earth, I would like to think, you find that it goes against that sort of signaling and the stereotype that you normally have.
You having traveled to so many different countries, so you've been a professor in Australia, Canada, Oxford. You've probably given talks in China and
everywhere,
pretty much everywhere, in the States. Are the signals different in different places?
Yeah, they are actually. I think for instance, in Asia, I think the way you dress. That's irrespective of academia or not. The way you dress signals respectability. So you need to be conscious of that, and I think that's unfair, even within the disciplines of academia. So, for instance, I would teach organizational behavior, and I teach organizational sociology. Very similar types of courses. At the same time, I would teach that to my sociology students. If I wear a suit and tie, they might lose credibility.
Right, because sociologists are usually more chill.
Yeah,
right?
They want to feel like you just came out of the field, right?
Right. You just came off the boat from
from X place, and you're just coming to the classroom.
Right.
Whereas in business school, if I did the same kind of attire that I was wearing as a sociologist, they would not take me very seriously. So it's not only a regional variation, there are nuances everywhere, and that's the signaling we're talking about. I think we need to be conscious of that. And I think it is... I mean, on the one hand, it kind of seems silly that I need to dress apart, shall we say. But on the other hand, we need to be conscious that we don't want our message to be lost by virtue that people see you, in a different way. So my message is what's important, obviously, and the work is what's important, but it should not be lost. It's akin to when you train politicians. Female politicians, you normally train them not to have like dangly earrings or anything big up here, necklaces, because people get distracted by that. It's not to suggest that it's right or wrong. It's just to suggest that's what people get distracted by.
That's the natural reaction.
Exactly.
Right? It's kind of like I was reading some stuff about on a table, if you have paper, right? If it's like really organized, it shows like you're kind of weak and agreeable.
Right.
But if you spread out the paper, it's kind of like paper man spreading.
Right.
That's kind of like I take up space.
Right.
And I have clout.
Right.
And these are all kind of these micro signals.
Exactly.
Right.
And we need to be conscious of that. And I think that's something we don't take seriously in our society, at least when it comes to getting jobs and being successful in your career. That signaling does matter, and we need to be aware of it, and we need to understand how others perceive us, because this plays a role, and it reduces conflict in the long run.
So how does this signaling conversation that we're having, how does that apply to the ethnic penalty or working in the workplace and so on, right? Because obviously, there's going to be I can see a very clear connection.
Of course, an extremely clear connection. I can preface this by, the book inspired a BBC documentary looking at what you're asking. And the documentary is called Jobs for the Boys. It was narrated by Sol Campbell, who was an ex-football player from Arsenal.
Book is this?
Sorry?
What book is your
The
book?
Ethnic Penalty one.
Ethnic Penalty,
And so and the entire idea was, the way you present yourself when you go to an interview, how you shake your hand, how you, your body language, the way you talk, the speed of your conversation. In the first 10 minutes, you can actually mute someone's conversation and then examine, do I trust this person or not based on their body language, based on how they present themselves. And the odds increase dramatically if you trust that person to get that job. So the odds increase dramatically to get the job if you trust that person. Again, based on this sort of body language and signaling and so forth.
So regardless of the resume, regardless of like past experiences, do you trust the guy?
Yeah. And in the end, that's what it comes down to. It's about fit and trust. Remember, at the interview stage, it's really about that. It's about, they already know your hard skills. They can see it on the resume. It's about, can I work with this person? Can I actually relate to this person? And the research I've been looking at last decade and a half has suggested the further up you are in the corporation, the more you have to interact with people, the more trust that's necessary.
Wait, so what I'm hearing is at the lower levels, like the grunt work, and that's the stuff that's also being at threat to be replaced by AI, right? The hard skills kind of matter at that point because you gotta do the stuff, you gotta deliver. But once you get to the top level, it's the soft skills, the navigating, the signaling, different things that come into play.
So I think I agree wholeheartedly there. I would suggest to a slight variation. Hard skills always matter, but matter less and less the further up you are. You still got to be very good at what you do, mind you. Soft skills do matter at the lower levels. Because you need an entree to get in. So to get that first job, you do need to be trusted. But the further up you go, soft skills matter more and more and more. And it's not something we train students or we train young people to actually become very good at. It can be honed in.
So how does this apply to the ethnic penalty? So when we think about ethnicity, we think about immigrants,
right,
and and of course immigrants and being ethnic doesn't necessarily have to be the same.
No, it doesn't.
You can, in your case, well, actually,
I'm both a visible minority and an immigrant.
And in my case, I'm not an immigrant. I'm born here. But
you're a visible minority.
I'm a visible minority, right? And so at the working level, all these things come into play. So I mean, like let's simplify the conversation first. what's the ethnic penalty?
Right.
And
how does it mix with immigration or immigrants?
Well, and how does it compare to gender inequality?
Okay.
Because that's a conversation we've had
before. It's all
before.
the same processes here.
Okay.
So you got to remember, whether or not you're an immigrant or you're a female or you're visible ethnic minority, to get a job requires you having hard skills. But to actually be the top candidate, it has to be this idea that I can trust you. So the way it works is, if I'm the employer and I'm trying to hire someone, and I have very little meaningful interaction with a particular group, whether it's female, ethnic minority, or immigrant. In other words, I don't have any meaningful interaction. I don't trust that group because I have very little meaningful interaction.
There's minimal homophily.
Much. And there's a lack of trust.
Right.
I'm going to hire the candidate who I trust more versus the candidate I don't trust as much.
Because they signal to be in the same tribe, at least.
And I mean, that's one way to think about it.
Right?
And the way it gets played out in the sort of work is, let's just say you have 10 productivity points, and I have 15 productivity points. And suggests you're going to an employer who has, in his entire life, been around someone like you, so he trusts you more. Neo-classical economists.
Someone like me, meaning
your background, male,
Asian,
yes,
and my age,
and your age, and
socioeconomic status,
as well as born in Canada, right?
So stuff like micro stuff like accent, mannerisms, and being able to talk about Dawson's Creek or whatever.
Exactly.
Right.
And you find that employer is more likely to hire you, even though you're less productive than I am. That happens over and over again, and it's something that economists were baffled by until sociologists entered the conversation, because economists would say, "You can hire me; I'm more productive. You're losing money by not hiring me."
Right.
But what they don't understand, what economists took a long time to actually figure out with sociological research, was people want to work with people they trust with. They're willing to take that productivity hit to work with people they enjoy working with.
This sounds like the classical conversation of rational choice,
right?
That, economists think everything should be done in a calculated, rational, utilitarian kind of way.
Right.
But when sociologists come in, it's like, no, emotions,
trust. Exactly. This plays a role, major role.
So, right. So, I mean, if we're to slap a percentage on the ethnic penalty,
right?
How much are ethnic minorities being paid less?
So, for every dollar a non-minority earns, a minority would earn 75 to 80 cents.
75 to 80 cents.
Yeah.
Right. And how about the gender inequality?
A very similar ratio.
Right. Fair. So what if you're a double whammy? You're a minority and a female.
Yeah. It doesn't give you a double penalty to the point. So it's still 75 cents.
You're not down all the way to 50 cents.
No, you're not down.
So you're still
being penalized though, dramatically.
Right. Yeah. And is this is this a North American thing?
This is global.
It's global.
So you got to remember, I've been doing this work in China. I've been doing this work in Australia, the UK, in Canada, the US. It's a similar process, right? It's not a Western concept. It's also in Asia.
So it's not like white power in America. It's more like majority
versus minority.
Right.
Those who are trusted the most are going to get the best paying jobs.
Now I want to give you a little push on that, right?
Sure.
In China, for example, or like at least in Hong Kong, because that's where my background is. In Hong Kong, during the 90s or 80s and 90s, white people had it pretty good, right? They had preferential treatment.
Right.
So how, I don't see this, so would this apply writ large, or got to be contextualized?
No, it's still the same concept though, because so let's just take it into the greater China context. Han Chinese, they have the best wages relative to the ethnic minorities. We see the same case in Hong Kong. So native-born Hong Kong people tend to have higher wages than non-native-born Hong Kong people.
Oh, so if people came in from China, even if they come in from Shenzhen and they speak with
So there's always exceptions, of course. And the exceptions is if you have a group that's there already that has high wages, they're more likely to hire their own group. And that's how you see a variation there. But for the most part, you're hiring people who you trust. So if Cantonese people have the best jobs, high status jobs, highest wages, they're more likely to trust people who they're interacting with in a more meaningful way.
So in the case of Canada then, for example, if in Toronto, most of the Fortune 500 companies here are run by white male, then they would naturally be inclined towards hiring
So it's not necessarily. I mean, it's not that simple. You gotta figure out who do they trust. So I grew up with Italians, for instance.
Okay.
And by virtue of that, I was hanging around a lot of Italians, and I trust Italians more than I trust non-Italians. So the trust actually, let's just say there's a default level of trust. It happens in childhood. So who you hang around before the age of 14, for instance, your meaningful friendships and relationships at those ages.
Okay. So that's
where you
why
establish
you're
that
0 to
trust.
14 thing, like the soft skills.
The soft
really
skills there are so important.
Right.
So that you can predict. You can predict so much. The odds of who you're going to marry, the odds of your wages, the odds of who you trust and don't trust, your unconscious biases, your implicit associations. You can predict most of this from a very young age. And so it's interesting how those formative years sets the tone for future years.
Right. So if you're, and why is it specifically 0 to 14? Like,
okay, so
what's the reason why like that?
So there's a few things. At age 7 is when the rational mind really gets developed. So before age 7, it's people are very emotive. Children necessarily are rational. 7 to 14 is when you're developing that rational mind. So it's like those building blocks of rationality get seeded. So you're building up on those kinds of ideas. You build up on these schemas, shall we say, right?
What's a schema?
Well, a schema is like how, for instance, why do I like blue versus white, for instance? I may like blue because at a very young age, blue was my favorite color, and I've built up from that.
Right. So it's kind of like a script that you're used
exactly.
to.
It's a script. It's your first script.
It's your very first script.
And we all have these scripts in life, right? And so we build from the scripts from our previous scripts. So 7 is when you have that rational mind, when your scripts really become more and more developed, shall we say, and it continues on to adulthood. From 0 to 7 is the emotional side. So you have your scripts there, and your parents play such a strong role there because they're the ones who are signaling what's good, what's bad, etc. And it affects you emotionally.
Right, setting the values.
The values, the norms, etc. In those age categories. Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things that we really look at in this podcast are soft skills, right?
Right.
So, if you're to give advice to people who are, not necessarily, it probably applies across the board for people who are in the workforce. Like, what are the essential soft skills that will help people flourish and like advance and do well?
I mean, this is a difficult question. And what I would suggest, just based on the work that I've been doing, is you need to recognize that you need to understand how jobs get created and how jobs are actually acquired. It's about a wide amount of experiences as possible. It's being able to understand and traverse different worlds, shall we say. What I mean by that in a tangible way is interact with as many people as possible at a very young age. Give as many experiences as possible at a very young age. Socialize children in a way that let them explore their world without prejudice, shall I say.
What do you mean by that?
I feel like if we are socializing kids, we tend to socialize them in a way that, of course, our own norms and values and our own experiences.
Right.
Sometimes we need to, I'm talking very academically here, but what I would suggest is this. As parents, it actually starts from the parents. I think parents should understand their unconscious bias. They should understand their implicit associations. Understand, what is it that their preferences are and what it's not their preferences. Because that plays such a strong role that gets carried on to the child. And so the child should be able to experience more. And I think that plays out in the long run, because if a child is able to experience and trust different groups and different situations more so, have that adaptability, they have greater long-term success because they're able to fit in to different experiences and groups.
So going back to what other soft skills then?
So the soft skills is adaptability. It's soft skills would be trusting different groups. Soft skills would be reading different situations and understanding different situations. We can get more complex about pivoting. It's okay to fail. I don't think we allow children the room to fail in our society at large. And what I mean by that is through failure you learn so much. It's in fact, and I go back to my own childhood and my own experiences. Most of the children I grew up with never failed. They were told they were the 1%, and they need to do something with their lives and so forth. And it's interesting when I look back now. most do not actually finish university.
The advanced kids.
The advanced kids do not finish university. They weren't given the soft skills necessary to succeed. They weren't encouraged with soft skills. They were pushed towards these hard skills and excel at that. But at some point, it's a phrase my mom always uses. She always says, you can know everything, but what's the point if you can't express it to any sort of group or a group of individuals, right? You can have knowledge, but you need to express that knowledge. You need to package that knowledge towards different groups. And I think that's a soft skill that is needed in our society at large today. It might reduce a lot of conflict and tensions if we are able to see the other side. Not necessarily agree with it, but see the other side. Have that tolerance. Have that understanding of the other. Able to message your own perspective by understanding the other. And that takes a lot of time. That doesn't start from now. That starts from a very young age.
Right, and stuff like, so failure would be something like resilience.
Resiliency.
Right? That would be the soft skill that you're talking about.
It's amazing because the more resilient you are, if you look at people who have succeeded as entrepreneurs.
So you're talking about like, when I think about resilience, I think of like Angela Duckworth's work on grit.
Right, grit. Resiliency is not something that can be engineered per se. It's something that has to be learned from a very young age. What I mean by that is it can't be engineered at a later age in life.
It can't be.
It cannot. It's something that happens at a very young age.
So
at least the psychological traits that's necessary. It happens at a very young age. Those seeds get implanted there. And employers always look for resilient people. They look for individuals who are, can pivot. That they're okay with failure and learn from the failure and move to something else.
They can bounce back.
They can bounce back. And I think that's something that, it's difficult to teach children because our natural instincts generally are often to protect them and so forth. But give them leeway to fail, give them leeway to experiment, give them leeway to, learn who they are within their context.
From the opposite perspective, if you're a manager or a leader and you're hiring for someone, how do you identify these traits?
So there are psychological testings you can do. There's psychometric testings as well, and some organizations do that. Consulting, for instance, they do that, do those kinds of testings. So you can actually look for those kinds of qualities there. At the end, though, you need to see a track record. One of the questions I often ask when I was interviewing people was talk about failure and what you learned from it, and how what you can take from it effectively, right? It's when people. I mean, again, it's kind of an interesting message because it seems counterintuitive because we raise children to succeed and to excel, to be the best. I feel on the one hand, you want to, if you're always succeeding, you're not challenging yourself fully. On the other hand, there's a utility in learning from your failures.
So it's almost like if you're always succeeding,
right,
then basically you're always playing by society's rules today.
It's not only society's rules. I'll give you an example. If you can look at my CV and so forth, you'll say, oh, this person's successful. But no one ever sees my CV of failures. It's a much long.
Give me an outline of your CV.
Oh, dear gosh. Do we I don't think we have enough time, to be very frank. But, as academics, we get rejected so much. It's like almost a weekly, daily occurrence. We get rejected from journals, grants. It's our daily lives it's more rejection than success. And that does not actually come across in the everyday. You might think, oh, this person's very successful. But it requires a resiliency. It requires a faith that you're going to do, you can learn from it, you can do better and better and better, constantly striving. Yeah.
Right. I'm thinking in terms of, but does failure bother you? For you, I know the fact that you're able to move across so many places in different contexts, have so many different interests, clearly you're able to
bounce back.
You bounce back, you pivot.
Yeah.
You pivot well, right?
Right.
So nothing ever rattles you?
Well, I'm still a human being, but I think, of course, it does bother me. And I'll give you an example. In one of my first year courses, I took a computer science course. I got 42% or something like that, something to that effect. I failed effectively. And I was like, wow, how did I fail
First
this?
year?
First year. Luckily, marks didn't count for first year, but
so this would be in Oxford.
This wasn't in Oxford. This is first year at Queen's. My first year.
Queen's. Okay.
It's a first year computer science course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was not for me. And I learned that I have computer science, at least in that spectrum, was not for me. And I learned that it's something that you learn through experience, right? And so it's pushing yourself to see, okay, maybe I'm good at this and maybe I'm not good at this. Maybe these are some of the skills that I need to identify to be better. These are some of the skills I need people to help me with, for instance. Or if I'm in an organization, I should have partners or colleagues or employees who can actually fill that void where I'm not very good at. So in a way, it's the way you look at it. Yeah, it's a failure on paper, and it's a terrible failure on paper, at least academically speaking, but it gives you insight into your your strengths and weaknesses and how you can actually adapt and learn from it.
Right.
So that's what I meant. Sure, there's negatives to this, but you see the positives to it as well. Yeah.
So you did work at CFAR.
Yes.
Right, and CFAR is does a lot of AI stuff.
Yeah.
Pretty much the future of the world.
Right.
Right. In terms of energy or AI or
right.
anything else. What's the future bringing for us? I mean, like, what's going to be happening in the next decade, if that's going to...
Right.
I mean, because with all these technological upheavals and all these disruptions, I mean, people are worried. Like, I talk to parents, and like the parents are like saying, I don't know how to prep my kid and all that stuff. Or even like people who are working right now, it's like, I don't know if I'm going to be relevant in 10 years. Right. What should they do?
It's funny because we tend to have very short hindsight. This has been a reality since the dawn of human civilization. What I mean by that is we've always had shifts and technological shifts, and we've always had social shifts.
But not at this rate.
I mean, the concept's still there.
Okay.
And where I'm going with this is the idea that in terms of adaptability and so forth, that is the core things still are necessary. You still need to be able to be resilient. You still need to be able to pivot. You still need to be able to be flexible, understand opportunities that comes in front of you. In other words, you need to be a critical thinker. If you want to break it down to characteristics that children should have, critical thinking, creative thinking, and the ability to pivot, the ability to have not only hard skills, but social skills that can complement that. Irrespective of the pace of change within our society at large, whether it's a hyper pace or a slower pace or a pace, nevertheless, you need these skill sets. And those who have those skill sets are generally better equipped to deal with change. So it's not necessarily, if you're a parent, you need to get them to learn more about AI and machine learning or this and this and this. I would suggest very strongly focus on those soft skills because it allows you to be able to adapt. And even if technology increases dramatically in the long run, and the workplace is very different in the long run, the capacity to adapt, to change and interact with that change in a meaningful way, that's something that kids should be taught how to do at a very young age.
So it's almost like hard skills, it's a given that hard skills are going to keep changing. And it's the soft skills that allow you to keep adapting to it, embracing it, evolving with it, pivoting with it, and embrace it. I think we have in our society, we don't embrace change very quickly. And in fact, sometimes we should pause and try and think of the implications of a rapid pace of change. You see this with AI in terms of the ethics of AI, for instance. We had this conversation like a month ago, and you were saying AI has developed emotion.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things is and one of the scary things is we hear people have been following AI for like a while now.
Right.
And one of the things that we're told is AI can't replace creativity. AI can't replace emotional stuff. Right.
Right.
But you just told me like last month that AI figured out emotions.
Yeah.
So what's
AI discriminates. AI can be emotional. AI can be creative.
So explain like how that happens first.
It's like any human process. So for instance, if we're looking for the best candidate, or let's just talk about insurance, for instance. Should I give better premiums to everyone, the same premiums to everyone, or should I give different premiums to, say, young males and young females, or older males and older females? If younger males are the riskiest category, I should give them a higher premium, right? So it's a rational kind of calculation. So there's that's discrimination.
Right.
That's actually that's positive. It's a form of discrimination.
Right. Right.
So when we say AI discriminates, that's I mean, when it does its calculations,
right.
it would suggest, well,
the odds
are this person is more riskier, and we're going to discriminate on that. AI can do that in terms of ethnic minority groups. If you use that as a variable, it can do that in terms of gender. If you use that as a variable, et cetera, et cetera. So in many respects, AI is mimicking the way humans are processing these things.
And these are the schemas that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, the schemas that we have here. And so AIs are built on schemas. They're built on previous knowledge, right? And we build on that. So it's not surprising that AI is discriminatory.
So even in the case of like creative, in creative work,
right,
or critical thinking work and all that, like AI can't replace that.
AI, it's not. I mean, I feel like that's the wrong conversation to have. It's not about replacing, because to replace makes us feel like we're obsolete.
Yeah, that's what people are afraid of, right?
But I mean, humans are going. We forget we're the ones advancing AI technologies, but B, humans have their own sort of way of being expressive and can work in harmony with AI. Or C, humans can just go on a different pathway. Irrespective, we shouldn't fear this. We shouldn't embrace this. This is something that is a positive to our society. It makes us better as human beings. It pushes our boundaries further. So it's not a negative in my worldview. That is, it's a positive.
What if like a Skynet becomes aware and starts, shooting missiles? Like,
too many Terminator movies.
I'm just saying, like, that's
right.
That's the most obvious example that everyone can think of, right?
Right.
Isn't that a concern, or?
I mean, there can be an equal concern that we have a dictator who, presses the nuclear button and shoots it and tries to bomb us, right? I mean, it's still replicating human kinds of miseries that can be possibilities, right?
Right.
So I don't not lose sleep over this, and I don't think most people should. Look, it is a possibility, a very slim and remote one, but there are safeguards, and equally so for human beings who have the nuclear codes, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. I remember you telling me that it's between continents there's actually tunnels of wires that connect the internet.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
We can have to cut that off.
We can cut that off,
physically
cut it off. So we don't seem to realize the internet is a wired conception, right? So there are massive wirings in the ocean, in the bottom of the ocean, that creates an internet.
The internet.
Right? The internet. So yeah.
Right.
So I mean, in the end, can just cut it off?
It's worst case scenario.
Pull the plug.
Yeah. EMP everything.
Exactly.
Okay.
But we'll be fine. I don't think that's something we should really worry about.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're talking about these soft skills that can be developed.
Right.
And you say like 0 to 14 is a critical age.
Yeah.
Most of us who are listening to this podcast would be way past that.
Right.
So
is it too late for them? That's what you're asking?
Is it too late? Yeah. I mean, what can we do?
Being aware of your biases, that's one of the most important things.
But isn't by definition bias? It's kind of like hard to be.
So there's implicit association tests you can actually take. You can do a quick Google search, type implicit association test. Harvard has a very good online sort of test on different spectrums in terms of age, gender, disability, et cetera, et cetera. And being aware, that's step one. Self-awareness, because in the end, there's not much we can do to actually, at least in an ethical way, to change our behaviors in terms of who we trust and not trust. It's sort of built into who we are. Again, in an ethical way, we can actually modify it, but in an ethical way, we can. And so being aware is super important. I think that's step one. Step two is understanding how our behaviors, our sort of unconscious bias and implicit associations affect our decision making. So am I less likely to hire you, even though you're more productive, because of my biases? How can I improve my levels of toleration, my levels of hiring better people, for instance? So step one is knowing. Step two is how to actually combat and being aware of your biases and mitigating them. And that's all we can do, really. And some steps, if it comes to hiring, we have a diverse hiring sort of panel, people from different experiences. And it's not surprising when you have that diverse panel, they hire different people than having one individual responsible, because that one person responsible, or if you have a homogeneous panel, they're going to replicate themselves.
But isn't there the argument that if you have like, I mean, it's kind of mean thing to say, but like, there's always the diversity hire,
right?
Whether it's ethnic minority, female, or I mean, it's usually these two are the most obvious ones, right? I mean, isn't there the case that there's a meritocracy and a diversity hire is kind of undermining that? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, here's the thing: there's never been a meritocracy. Let's just deal with that right now. Let's get that out of the way.
Okay.
A meritocracy has been a myth in our society, and we've known that since our late 40s, early 50s, when there was work in Britain looking at class and meritocracy. So the certain classes tend to have, the upper classes tend to have better privileges. That's what they found in Britain. Meritocracy has always been a myth. And so the idea here is if there's a lack of meritocracy, and in other words, what we mean by meritocracy is from your hard work alone, from your skill set alone, you should get the best job, best wage, etc. Right?
So that's the hard skills.
Skills we're talking about. Right. There's never been that. And economists call us penalties. There's a lack of returns to your education, right? So females and visible ethnic minorities or non-native born people might be more penalized. Right. And so they have these penalties. The fact is that we need to understand in our models and the way we examine this stuff is soft skills matter. You are going to hire someone you trust. I mean, it makes sense. Why would I work with someone who I don't trust? So when somebody's unconscious biases and implicit associations, being aware is just a major step in itself. And taking steps such as having a diverse hiring sort of panel with different people with different experiences, that can mitigate those kinds of penalties. So when we hire the minority, when we hire the female, it's not, there's a risk of tokenism, but countless studies have reinforced that it actually improves productivity and creativity and advancements in most top firms by virtue of having that diverse culture and diverse communities within their their employees pool.
Now, wouldn't there be a counter sociological argument against that, right? And I'm thinking about the higher the degree of homophily, which is similarity in different traits or signals or symbols, the more togetherness there is, right? And so that's like that's a classic sociological question. Like,
togetherness, yes, togetherness, of course, within a working culture, and that's what you want in a working culture. But you also want to have, a creative destruction, for instance. So for tech, it depends on the sector. So in tech, for instance, you want people who are not just like you, who are thinking just like you. In banking and high finance, very similarly, you want people who see things differently.
Who will scrutinize and critique
it's
assumptions.
Like, if you want to use sociological literature, you can talk about George Simmel's Stranger. And the stranger was this character, this individual who would come to the city, who came from a different city, and because they weren't socialized in that city, they would see some good things and bad things, right? They didn't have these prejudices that people take for granted within the city, and so they were able to see the holes. They were able to see things that can be improved and things that were not as advanced. So hiring the minority and hiring the stranger, shall we say, gives you that resource that you're lacking within an organization.
An outsider's perspective.
Effectively, right? So there's a massive resource to that.
And especially in this world nowadays where the world is getting smaller, transnationalism, migration, these are all major factors, and just like, transnational trade, for example, right? And immigrants coming into Canada, entering the workplace and being able to see this idea will not fly in China per se.
Or it may not even fly here. You can do it better. You can do it better. And this is what we've learned in China. We're going to adapt it to this context here. And we can see this for a good example could be the bike sharing program. China's rolled out a very successful bike sharing program in some of the major cities. It's reduced a lot of congestion to some great extent. We can learn from the Chinese from that, and you can learn from a macro perspective. There's a lot of solutions to local problems that's out there. Having individuals who have that knowledge, that's amazing.
How about we can talk about the political climate now, right? How there's kind of like a swing back to the right, towards more of a, I don't want to say nativism, but populism.
Populism,
Definitely.
Semi-authoritarian.
Semi-authoritarian, and just
The good old
closing
days.
the borders. Reminiscent on the good old days kind of thing. And that's in the U.S. That's especially in Europe.
That's in Europe. It's in the U.S. It's in
everywhere.
China. It's in Australia. It's everywhere. It's not one locale who's immune from it.
So where are you seeing, like,
where's the sources of that?
No, I wouldn't say the sources, because I mean the sources is quite clear. Like it's the global tensions and the migrations and just
the speed of change,
and then displaced people who feel like we can't keep up to the changes. Right. Or like and stuff like the tokenism, the diversity hires, making the local people like, oh, like my skill is just as good as theirs.
Right. Why is that person getting hired, not me?
No, this, or something like affirmative action. Yeah. Right. You have an SAT score of I mean.
Let's just say you get perfect in your SAT scores.
Yeah, if you're an Asian, you get perfect on your SAT scores. I mean, that's the lawsuit against Harvard right now. Right. And then if you're black and you don't get perfect, but you're able to get in over the Asians because of the affirmative action or with diversity or you get the idea.
So this is a very big question, and here's the thing. I'm a firm believer that when we're born, it's a lottery where we're born. And where we're born sets our life chances. So if I was born in a very different community, I was socialized in a very different community, I would have very different life chances. I probably wouldn't end up the way I've ended up. So it is a natural lottery. What affirmative action is trying to recognize is that this lottery does exist. So if I am, I don't know, say Trinidadian, and I grew up in a very impoverished community in Toronto, and I am versus someone who came from a very wealthy, well-resourced community, and we have similar scores, I would like to think that because of that positionality from the starting point, we would want to try and encourage a Trinidadian to continue onwards. And the reasoning is not necessarily, it seems unfair on the surface level, if the choice is between one or the other. But it does two things. One, you got to look at where the person's starting from and where they're going. So a 1600 based on one versus a 1600 based on another is not equally the same. Another way to think about this is long-term. If we're looking at society at large, because we tend to be very individualistically oriented in our societies. But if we're looking at the community at large, we want to ensure that resources of other groups are increasing tremendously. When impoverished groups' resources increase, so if in our example, if this Trinidadian gets in and contributes back to their whole community, those resources increase. Everyone wins out as a society at large. Everyone wins out. And I think viewing it from that lens, if you're looking at it from a community's lens, it's to your advantage to ensure there's diverse, that you have a schooling system and a working system and employment that reflects the community.
So it sounds more like in terms of public policy. It makes sense.
It makes sense from public policy.
You don't want any specific group to feel so displaced that they want to flip the system.
So, another thing I do looked at is looking at conflict and ethnic violence. And ethnic violence generally occurs when there's a lack of meaningful access to institutions, so you don't feel like your voice is being heard, plus low SES, low socioeconomic scores. So when you have that combination, low SES and lack of institutional access, it increases potential for ethnic violence. Whether it's Canada or China or anywhere in the world, it's a very, very, tried and true kind of formula. So we want to improve SES in our communities. We want to improve SES amongst all our communities. We want to make people feel as though they're part of the process in terms of our institutions, whether it's an authoritarian or a democratic institution. People want to feel as though their needs are being met. So in an authoritarian context, even though they don't have the vote, if their needs are being met, they're okay with that compact with the government at large.
This is all very macro, right?
Very macro.
Yeah, macro.
But it comes back to the individual. The individual does not actually see these macro forces. They don't see the societal forces.
So here's I'll drag it back. I'll drag it back down to the ground. If we're looking at inner city Toronto.
Yes.
Or like downtown Toronto.
Right.
You have a kid, Vietnamese kid, who came and their parents, work at a grocery store.
Right.
The kid, and the kid, has to even work the till, but they're trying to study at the same time.
Right.
They get really good grades. They get they do very well on their SAT because they want to apply to an American university. Versus a black person who grew up in a middle class neighborhood, and then they apply, and then the black person gets in because and essentially he has a lower score, but he still is able to get in over that student, that Vietnamese student who came from that kind of background. I mean, and she's penalized. He or she is penalized because of their ethnicity. I mean, at the individual level, that becomes very.
It's a very touchy and sensitive issue, obviously.
Right.
And both are in a terrible situation in terms of, from one standpoint, because it's when you have such few openings at elite institutions, you do need to. Figure out what kind of class do you want. So I can tell you from the professor's side, when I've been involved with admissions, for instance, I want to have an admissions class that's as diverse as possible.
You had admissions. You were in
both at Oxford. I did that at Oxford, and
for the undergrads.
For graduates.
Yeah.
And I also did that in Melbourne as well. And in both contexts, you want to have a class that's not only representative of the society at large, but as diverse, and different socioeconomic backgrounds, different ethnic groups, different gender balances, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a shame because you can, you have, say, 20,000 applicants, and there's 1,000 slots available. I mean, for the most part, you really can't. I mean, you have such great candidates. Like you need to think about who do you actually want? What kind of diversity do you want? So it's not necessarily. I mean, it goes to that meritocracy. It's not only about the score.
Right.
It's not only about doing hard work alone. It's about different soft skills.
And that's where the personal statement
comes into play.
And, you sitting in these committees where you select your graduate students, doctoral students, or master's students, right? Usually, what I hear the process is, just say you have only you can only get 2 doctoral students in that year's intake.
Right.
There's 20 candidates shortlisted. Get rid of the 10 who are relatively weaker.
Right.
And it's not, and
there's still generally a very high standard, I got to admit, of candidates. The candidates are super amazing. It is heartbreaking to actually say to people, well, at least you don't see our side, but it's heartbreaking when you have all these amazing candidates and you can only admit 2. So you got to think about fit. The more competitive something is, you think about fit, and you think about who's going to fit in the best in terms of their work, their research, the way they do things. Does it fit with me as an academic? Does it fit with what I want to do? So for some institutions, that's the reality. In fact, I would suggest for most institutions at the graduate level, you look at fit. Do we have people who can supervise this person? Do we have individuals? Does this person not only meet the academic standard, but can we see potential for impact in the long run?
Right.
And so I guess the more competitive it is and the more applicants you have, the more gradients you need to add to it.
Right. And there's also a luck factor, right? Is this person like on sabbatical?
Right.
The person who could take this student.
Very true. Luck and so far, who's actually reading the application as well. So luck plays a role in many of this. And that's an element that we don't really talk about a lot. It's a random lottery.
And this applies to not only academia,
for
but
everything,
also corporations.
For everything, you may have a recruiter who fits well with you. You may have so many times in my non-academic career, I've found that people on the recruiting committee who had connections with me went to the same school. We had similar backgrounds. We had similar. I mean, irrespective, right?
Yeah.
But again, it's that trust. It's a signaling of trust.
So even for you, it reminds me of our story, right? You and I, we met at Penn,
right?
And then I happened to end up at Oxford as well, and you happen to be from Oxford. We're both Canadians, from Toronto.
So it's a trust.
Queens,
visible minorities, similar interests. Yeah. And so there you go right away. There's that trust that's being established. I'm more likely to hire you, and you're more likely to hire me.
Right.
And I mean, look, it's how humans interact. It's how we behave. I think it's acknowledging that at step one. And I feel like we are acknowledging that process in our society. It's not necessarily meritocratic in terms of hard skills. It's meritocratic in terms of maybe trust should be in our models of what is meritocratic. If I trust you, I'm more likely to hire you. Because why would I want to work with someone who I don't trust?
It sounds like you're playing to both sides of the argument right now, right? On one hand, there's the diversity hire that's needed, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's a policy.
It's a tension. It's a tension. I get it. I mean, on the one hand, I want to hire people who I trust. On the other hand, we need diversity.
Right.
And so it's catch-22. It might seem like on the surface level, but it's a balancing act.
It's balancing.
It's definitely a balancing act. So I need to hire people who are more diverse than and I come from backgrounds not from my own. If I'm in an organization that needs creativity and needs to progress in terms of
creative
destruction,
right?
Effectively.
Right. Yeah. So here's a question I'm curious about because I'm sure you've supervised your share of doctoral students, right?
Yes.
And or even manage different types of people at a corporate level,
right?
You've done corporate before,
yes?
Just to be sure, right? I mean, what are the people that you find to be the most successful? Whether they're and I'm sure the skills overlap in terms of doctoral student, whether they're in corporate. I mean, who are the most successful people?
I would say people who have a myriad of experiences, who have failed, who can pivot, or resilient. In fact, I would say resiliency is the most important thing. Notice I haven't said hard skills, like the smartest people, right? I did not say that. I said it's, for the most part, it's people who are super resilient and have the capacity to relate to others, can package information and details to different audiences, and can develop that trust that's so widespreading.
In Oxford, in places like Oxford, I mean, there's a lot of geniuses there, right? Or at least they've always been the top of their class, right? And probably 99th percentile in terms of IQ or something. I don't know. I'm just throwing generalizations.
Sure, but the general gist is out there.
The general gist is out there, right? For the people you've supervised there, have there been situations where that person can be brilliant, but their soft skills are so off that's just kind of like,
So I wouldn't talk about Oxford, but I'll talk about Cambridge when I was a PhD student. Cambridge is a majority science-oriented university.
Okay.
And you have some of the top minds I've ever. I mean, there's stuff that they're doing that it's beyond my own comprehension. But the social skills were not the greatest for many, and you can see how they struggle in their lives with that. And that can work in the hard sciences to a great extent, but there are limitations to that.
That's why these types of people gravitate towards that, right? Because that's the only kind of ecosystem they can survive in and thrive.
And even then, that the ecosystem is changing and shifting. How so? You still need people to, again, you can have the most difficult individuals to work with, or the people who don't have the social skills, but you still need individuals who can package that information and present that information. So let me put it in a different way. You still need people to do the basic research, irrespective of their personalities.
Right.
But at some point, those who get ahead beyond academia are those who have the social skills. And so I can't stress that enough. It's not only hard skills.
You got a story for that?
I have so many stories about that.
Give me some stories.
But I mean,
like when you think about a person who has crazy hard skills, but they're devoid of soft skills.
I've worked with many people like that. I'm not gonna single out anyone or give you a particular story for their privacy. But
of course,
I've worked with so many people who are so brilliant. And if you've never encountered these people, you'll be like, this person's really awful as a human being. I grew up with people like this, so it's my entire life. I've had people who were super brilliant, but not necessarily socially. There, shall we say, at least cannot relate to the everyday. And I think they would struggle all their lives. I've seen them struggle their entire lives in terms of the relationships that they have, etc. And so, in many respects, I think those if they were nurtured at a very young age to deal with these social issues and social problems that they may encounter later on in life. to identify that at a young age. They can develop strategies to cope, but it has to be done at a very young age. It's hard to do it in adulthood, if not impossible.
Right. So for you, it almost sounds like it's unfortunate that they've never really had this kind of development. It's
unfortunate because two things. When I think parents normally don't know what to do with advanced kids. It's even, and there's a lot of literature now, there's a lot of support systems, etc. But we generally don't know how to deal and manage that because we can't relate to them in many respects. The second thing is, when it's identified that these are their personalities and so forth, we really don't focus on the soft skills enough. And I think by focusing on the soft skills, it gives that healthy personality, that healthy individual can be well adjusted. And you know what, in the long run, they actually do earn. If we're looking at earning potential, they earn more if they have better soft skills.
Right. And even with the right soft skills, they can even acquire the hard skills.
Yes. But hard skills you can always improve and acquire. Soft skills, I feel like there's a shorter time span for it to get acquired because it has to be acquired at a very young age to be fully effective.
Right. All right, that's all I got today.
Well,
Thanks a lot for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.